Here is the fully localized, Americanized adaptation of the script, written as a seamless narrative prose suitable for audio narration. The notification lit up my phone at 11 o'clock at night. It was a message in the family Christmas group chat. My daughter-in-law, Brittany, had written, "Please don't come this year. We want a drama-free Christmas." My fingers froze over the screen. Seconds later, my own son, Mason, liked the message. My son, the same son I was supporting with $15,000 a month. The same son for whom I paid for absolutely everything. I took a deep breath. My hands weren't shaking from sadness. They were shaking from something much more dangerous. They trembled as I typed my reply. Excellent choice. That also frees you from my monthly transfers of $15,000. I hit send. And then, the group chat exploded. My phone began to vibrate incessantly. Calls, texts, desperate voice notes, but it was already too late. They had just woken up the wrong woman. And what came next destroyed them completely. But to understand how we got to that moment, I need to tell you who I am. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 63 years old. And for the last 15 years, I have been the fool who funded the luxury lives of people who treated me like an ATM with legs. I have been a widow since my husband, Robert, died in an accident when my son Mason was just 20 years old. I am a successful CPA, a woman who built a consulting business from scratch while raising a son alone. A woman who denied herself every luxury so that he could have everything. Mason was now 35 years old. An architect who graduated with honors, thanks to me paying every penny of his college and grad school tuition. He has been married for 7 years to Brittany, a 32-year-old woman who smiled with perfect veneers while mentally calculating how much she could get out of me. They are the parents of Noah and Chloe, my grandchildren, 5 and 3 years old, whom they barely let me see. And there was the problem. I wasn't the grandmother. I was the provider, the cash cow, the resource that kept their lie of financial stability running, because the truth that no one wanted to admit was simple and devastating. Without me, they had nothing. The condo where they lived, that beautiful 2,000-square-foot unit in the best part of downtown, with a panoramic view and luxury finishes, was in my name. I had made the down payment of $120,000. I paid the monthly mortgage of $3,200. The imported car Mason drove so proudly, that brand new gray SUV, I had bought with cash for $58,000 because they needed something safe for the kids. The private prep school, where Noah and Chloe studied, with its tuition of $2,500 a month for each child, came out of my account. The trips to the Hamptons, to Miami, to Cabo, all documented on Brittany's Instagram with hashtags like Blessed Family and Living My Best Life, were paid for by me. The housekeeper who went 3 times a week, the gym memberships, the kids' swim lessons, Brittany's nutritionist, the dinners at expensive steakhouses, everything, absolutely everything, was sustained by me with those transfers of $15,000 that I made religiously on the first of every month. And they knew it. Of course, they knew it. But at some point, my generosity stopped being a gift and became an obligation. In their twisted minds, I owed them that money. It was my function, my purpose. I existed to serve them. The first few years after the wedding were different. Brittany called me sweet mother-in-law and invited me for coffee. Mason came over on Sundays to eat at my place and tell me about his architectural projects. When the kids were born, I was welcome. I could visit them, hold them, bring them gifts. But something changed 2 years ago. It was gradual, like poison slowly seeping into the water until you can't drink without getting sick. Brittany started with comments wrapped in velvet. Eleanor, experts say too many visits confuse the children. Eleanor, we need to set healthy boundaries. Eleanor, this isn't personal. It's for the well-being of our nuclear family. Nuclear family. As if I were radioactive, as if my presence contaminated them. Then came the cancellations. I would arrive with gifts for the kids and find the door locked and a text message waiting. Something came up. Let's do another day. I would call to talk to my grandkids and hear the excuses. They're asleep. They're eating. They're busy. 3- and 5-year-old children. Too busy for their grandmother. Birthday invitations arrived with impossible time slots. It is from 10 to 11 in the morning. Immediate family only. I was the mother of the birthday boy's father, but apparently, I didn't qualify as immediate family. But never, ever, was there an excuse not to receive the money. That always arrived on time. In fact, the requests increased. Mom, we need to remodel the kitchen. It is $30,000. Mom, the car needs new tires. It is $2,000. Mom, we want to sign Noah up for robotics classes. It is $500 extra a month. And I, like the idiot I was, always transferred it. I always said yes. I always prioritized their needs over my dignity. Until that night. Until that message. We want a drama-free Christmas. The phrase spun in my head like a broken record. Drama. I was the drama. The woman keeping them financially alive was a nuisance. An inconvenience. Something to get rid of to enjoy the holidays in peace. And Mason, my son, my only son, the boy I nursed, the teenager I consoled when he was rejected by his first love, the young man I applauded at his graduation. That man had liked my exclusion. I got out of bed and walked to my desk. I turned on the lamp and pulled out a green binder where I kept all the important documents. The deed to the condo in my name, the title to the car in my name, the school contracts with my signature, bank statements showing every transfer from the last 7 years, 120 months multiplied by $15,000, $1,800,000, almost $2 million invested in the comfort of people who were now slamming the door in my face. I looked at those papers, and something clicked in my brain. Something cold, calculating, definitive. They had played with me for too long. They had assumed I would always be there, submissive, quiet, paying. They had mistaken my love for weakness, my generosity for stupidity. But I wasn't weak, and I definitely wasn't stupid. I was a CPA. I knew about numbers, contracts, and consequences, and they were about to learn the most expensive lesson of their lives. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my desk, surrounded by documents, statements, and the cold light of the lamp illuminating my face. Every paper I reviewed was a slap of reality. Every documented transfer was proof of my misunderstood generosity. But it was also evidence. Evidence that I held all the power and they held absolutely nothing. At 6 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Mason. I declined the call. He called again. I declined again. Then the text messages arrived. Mom, please pick up. Mom, Brittany didn't mean that. Mom, it was a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. That word made me laugh bitterly. There was no possible misunderstanding in, "Don't come, we want a drama-free Christmas." Those words were crystalline, surgical, deliberate. I put the phone aside and made coffee. While the water boiled, notifications kept coming. Brittany had written in the group, "Eleanor, I think there was a misunderstanding. We can talk calmly." Calmly. As if I were an uncontrolled hysteric. As if my reaction to being publicly humiliated was exaggerated. I didn't reply. Silence, I learned that night, is the most powerful weapon that exists. It leaves them in uncertainty, wallowing in their own anxiety. At 9 in the morning, I grabbed my purse and left. I had an appointment I had mentally scheduled since 3 in the morning. I needed to talk to someone who had always seen the truth, even when I refused to see it. My sister, Margaret. She lived 20 minutes from my house, in a modest but cozy building. Margaret was 68, 5 years older than me, and possessed the wisdom of someone who has lived long enough not to swallow lies. When she opened the door, she looked at me and knew immediately that something had changed. "Something happened," she said. "It wasn't a question. It happened," I confirmed. We sat in her living room, with her hanging plants and black and white photos of our parents. I showed her the message. I showed her Mason's like. I saw her face harden. "That ungrateful brat," she muttered. "That manipulative snake." But she didn't say "I told you so," even though she had been telling me for years. Margaret had never trusted Brittany. From the beginning, she saw what I refused to see. "That woman has calculator eyes," she had told me on the wedding day. "Look at how she eyes your watch, your ring, your purse. She isn't looking at your son with love. She is taking inventory. I had defended her. You are being unfair, Margie. Brittany is a good girl. How blind had I been? What are you going to do? Margaret asked me, while brewing chamomile tea in chipped mugs that had belonged to our mother. I am going to cut off their supply, I replied with a calm that surprised even me. I am going to stop the transfers. I am going to take back what is mine. I am going to teach them that I am not an infinite resource they can exploit and discard. Margaret smiled. It wasn't a joyful smile. It was a smile of dark satisfaction, of pending justice. It is about time, she said. She explained that she had an acquaintance, a family law attorney named James Sterling. He is good, Margaret said. He is one of those lawyers who doesn't just know the law, he uses it like a scalpel. She gave me his number. I called him right there, from her living room, my hands still trembling but my voice steady. James could see me that same afternoon at 4. I accepted. I went back home to change. I needed to look professional, serious, unbreakable. I chose a pearl gray power suit, the one I wore for important client meetings. I applied my makeup carefully, not to look pretty, but to look powerful. I gathered all the documents in a leather portfolio: invoices, contracts, property titles, bank statements, 7 years of generosity documented to the millimeter. While I organized the papers, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Mason had called 18 times. Brittany had sent 3 long voice notes that I didn't listen to. They had added my brother-in-law, Brittany's father, and even Brittany's mom to the family group chat, all writing variations of the same message. This can be resolved by talking. There is no need to react like this. Let's think of the children. Let's think of the children. Always the children as a shield. As if they hadn't thought of the children when they decided to keep me away from my own grandkids. I left the house at 3:30. James Sterling's firm was downtown, in an old building restored with good taste. His office was sober, with shelves full of law books and a dark mahogany desk. James was a man of about 40, salt and pepper hair, thin glasses, and an expression that conveyed sharp intelligence. He greeted me with a firm handshake. I told him everything. I held nothing back. I told him about the 15 years raising Mason alone, about the sacrifices, about how I had funded every aspect of his adult life, about Brittany and her transformation from affectionate daughter-in-law to cold manipulator, about the progressive exclusions, about last night's message, about my son's like. James listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes in a black notebook. When I finished, he spread the documents out on his desk. He reviewed them with professional meticulousness. After 15 minutes of silence interrupted only by the sound of shuffling papers, he looked up. "Mrs. Vance," he said with a grave voice, "you hold all the legal power here. The condo is in your name. The vehicle is in your name. There is no document making them co-owners or establishing an obligation for support. You can, if you choose, reclaim both assets immediately." I felt something expand in my chest. It wasn't happiness. It was something bigger. It was empowerment. "The monthly transfers," James continued, "are voluntary gifts. You can suspend them whenever you wish, without any legal consequence. In fact, if they tried to sue for alimony or support, they would lose spectacularly. Your son is a 35-year-old adult, a licensed professional, with no disability. There is no legal basis to claim support." I leaned back in the leather chair. "And if they fight?" I asked. James smiled slightly. "Let them fight. They will lose. The documents are irrefutable. Besides," he added, "if they decide to be difficult, we can initiate an eviction process for the property and repossession of the vehicle. It would take a few months, but the result would be inevitable. They have nowhere to stand." I left James Sterling's office with a plan. It wasn't a plan of blind or hysterical revenge. It was a cold, methodical plan, executed with the precision of an accountant who knows exactly where every penny and every document is. James had given me clear instructions. First, suspend the automatic transfers. Second, formally notify them that the condo and vehicle were my property and that any future use required my explicit authorization. Third, document everything, every call, every text, every attempt at manipulation. That night, from my computer, I logged into the banking system. My fingers moved over the keyboard with determination. I canceled the automatic transfer of $15,000 scheduled for December 1st. Then I reviewed the supplementary credit cards I had given to Mason and Brittany. I blocked them all. Grocery card, blocked. Gas card, blocked. Department store cards, blocked. In 15 minutes, I had cut the flow of money feeding their lifestyle as if closing a main valve. I poured myself a glass of red wine and sat on the sofa. The phone was still going crazy. 32 missed calls, 47 unread messages, 6 voice notes. I took a sip of wine, breathed deep, and finally opened the messages. The family group was absolute chaos. Brittany had written, "Eleanor, this is a horrible misunderstanding. Please, don't make rash decisions. We can meet and clear everything up. The kids miss you." "The kids miss me? How convenient that the kids missed me right now," Mason had written. "Mom, please, let's talk like adults. Brittany is very upset. She says you misinterpreted her message. She just wanted a small, intimate Christmas without so many people. She didn't mean to exclude you specifically. She didn't mean to exclude me specifically. So, who else had she excluded? Which other person in the 6-member group had she told not to come? Only me, the only person paying for their entire existence." There were messages from people I didn't even know well. Brittany's mom. "Mrs. Eleanor, this is Linda. I know there was a mix-up. Brittany is very sensitive about the holidays because she suffered a lot during complicated Christmases as a child. Please, let's give her another chance." Brittany's dad. "Dear Eleanor, I think we are all reacting excessively. Families have misunderstandings. We shouldn't make drastic decisions over a simple message." Simple message. As if words didn't have weight. As if cruelty packaged in politeness was less cutting. I didn't reply to anyone. I drank my wine in silence, letting the panic grow on the other side, letting them wonder what I was thinking, letting them feel the discomfort of not having control. For the first time in years, I had the power, and they knew it. At 11 at night, when I was getting ready to sleep, the message I was waiting for arrived. It was from Mason, but the tone was different. It was no longer conciliatory. It was desperate. "Mom, the cards aren't working. What did you do?" "Brittany went to the supermarket and the purchase was declined. This is humiliating. Why are you punishing us like this?" Punishing. That word made me smile bitterly. I wasn't punishing them. I was simply ceasing to gift them a life they couldn't afford alone. But in their distorted minds, taking away my resources was a punishment. Gifting them almost $2 million in 7 years was their right. I typed my first response of the night. "It isn't a punishment, Mason. It is a decision. You wanted a drama-free Christmas. I also want a life without being treated like a walking bank. The cards are canceled. The transfers are suspended. If you want to talk, we will talk with my lawyer present." I hit send. The reaction was instant. My phone started ringing. It was Mason. I declined the call. He called again. I declined again. Then Brittany called. I declined. She called from another number I didn't recognize. I declined. I turned off the phone and went to sleep. For the first time in months, I slept deeply. There were no nightmares. There was no guilt. Just peace. The next morning, I turned on the phone, and there were 63 notifications. But among all the hysterical messages was one from Margaret. "Proud of you, sis. Stay strong. Love you." That simple message gave me more strength than 1,000 motivational speeches. I made coffee, dressed in comfortable clothes, and prepared to enjoy my Saturday. I had forgotten what a Saturday felt like without worrying about other people's needs. At noon, I received a formal email from James. He had drafted 2 letters, one notifying Mason and Brittany that the condo was my exclusive property and that they required my authorization to continue inhabiting it. Another notifying them that the vehicle registered in my name had to be returned or legal action would proceed. The letters were cold, professional, irrefutable. "Shall I send them?" James asked at the end of the email. "Send them," I replied without hesitation. That afternoon, I went to Margaret's house. I needed to be with someone who understood me, who wouldn't judge me, who wouldn't try to convince me to make peace for the sake of the family. Margaret made her famous pot roast, and we sat down to eat while I told her every detail. "Do you know what the saddest part is?" I told her as I cut a piece of meat, that I would have given everything voluntarily if they had treated me with a minimum of respect. I didn't ask for adoration. I just asked to be seen, to be considered, to be included. Margaret put her hand on mine. I know, Ellie, but people like Brittany don't understand respect. They only understand transactions. To her, you were useful as long as you gave and stayed quiet. The moment you had emotional needs, you became a burden. And Mason, she sighed deeply. Mason let that happen. That is his sin. Not her manipulation, but his silent complicity. She was right. Brittany's betrayal hurt, but it was expected. Mason's betrayal was the one that truly shattered me. He was my son, my blood, the child I had rocked in my arms when he cried from colic, the teenager I had hugged when his heart was broken, the young man I had applauded at every achievement. And that man had liked my exclusion. He had chosen the comfort of agreeing with his wife over the dignity of his own mother. Do you think they'll learn? I asked Margaret. She shook her head slowly. I don't know. But that isn't your problem anymore, Ellie. Your problem now is learning to live for yourself. You've spent 40 years living for others. Your husband, rest his soul, loved you but also needed you. Your son needed you and squeezed you until the last drop. When was the last time you did something just because you wanted to? Margaret's question resonated in my head for days. When was the last time I did something just because I wanted to? I couldn't remember. Each decision of the last 15 years had been filtered through Mason's needs. Every purchase, every trip, every plan had been calculated based on how it could help him. Even my own professional victories, I had minimized so as not to overshadow his achievements. I had lived like a satellite orbiting around his sun, forgetting that I also had my own light. On Monday, James's certified letters arrived at their destination. I knew because at 10 in the morning, my phone exploded again. This time, it wasn't just texts. Mason showed up at my condo. I heard the insistent doorbell, then the pounding on the door. Mom, I know you're in there. Please, open up. We need to talk. His voice sounded hoarse, desperate. I remained seated in my living room, drinking herbal tea, listening to him beg on the other side of the door like a stranger. Mom, we got some letters from a lawyer. They say we have to vacate the condo. This can't be real. Please, open up. You are taking this too far. Too far. They had excluded me from Christmas, humiliated me publicly, treated me like disposable trash for years, but I was the one taking things too far. The irony was so thick I could almost touch it. I didn't open the door. After 40 minutes of pleading that turned into frustration and then anger, Mason left. I heard his footsteps fading down the hall, the sound of the elevator, and then silence. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was pure adrenaline. I had faced the moment I feared most, seeing him beg, and I had survived without caving. That was progress. That night, Margaret invited me to her reading group. It was a club of ladies from her building who met every 2 weeks to discuss books and drink wine. Normally I would have said no, inventing some excuse about being busy or tired, but I wasn't the Eleanor of before. I'm coming, I told her. And I went. Margaret's friends were fascinating women. Danielle, a 70-year-old former literature teacher with incredible stories about her travels through Europe. Andrea, a retired psychologist of 65 who radiated quiet wisdom. Natalie, a 62-year-old engineer who had started her own consulting business after divorcing at 50. Women who had lived, who had suffered, who had survived and thrived. When Margaret vaguely told them my situation, without going into details but making it clear I was going through a family conflict, they all nodded with understanding. Toxic family, Danielle said while pouring more wine. The worst kind of toxicity because it comes wrapped in obligation and guilt, Andrea added. The hardest thing is accepting that you can love someone and still need to protect yourself from them. Love isn't enough when there is abuse. Those words hit me. Abuse. I had never thought of what Mason and Brittany did to me as abuse. I thought of abuse as something physical, like shouting and violence. But Andrea explained, financial and emotional abuse is real. When someone exploits you economically while making you feel like it's never enough, that is abuse. When someone isolates you and makes you feel guilty for wanting affection, That is abuse. They don't need to hit you to destroy you. I drove home that night with tears in my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition. For years I had normalized the mistreatment because it came from my son. I had accepted emotional crumbs while delivering economic feasts. I had allowed them to treat me as a means to an end instead of a human being with needs and feelings of my own. The following days were an emotional roller coaster. The calls and texts continued, but now with a different tone. Brittany had sent a long audio message, almost 10 minutes, crying and explaining that she came from a poor family, that she never had the opportunities I had, that she just wanted to give her children the life she never had. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, painting herself as a victim of circumstances while conveniently forgetting that the life she wanted for her children was being paid for by me, not her. Mason sent a text that said, "Mom, I am your son, your only son. Are you really going to destroy our relationship over a misunderstanding? Dad would be disappointed to see how you are acting." That last line infuriated me more than everything before. Bringing Robert into this, using the memory of my dead husband as an emotional weapon, was low even by Mason's standards. Robert had been a good, hard-working man who valued dignity and respect. If he could see how his son treated me, I wouldn't be the one disappointing him. On Thursday, I received an unexpected call. It was from the kids' school. "Mrs. Vance, we're calling because this month's payment was declined. Could you update the payment information?" My heart sped up. The tuition. I had forgotten it came directly out of my account. "How much is it?" I asked, although I knew the answer. $5,000 for both children. I took a deep breath. "Please contact the parents, Mr. Mason Vance and Mrs. Brittany Vance. I am no longer responsible for that payment." There was an uncomfortable silence on the other end. "I understand, ma'am. We will proceed to contact them. Just to inform you, if payment is not received in a week, the children will not be able to continue attending until it is regularized." "I understand perfectly," I said with a firm voice. "Have a good day." I hung up and stared at the phone. I felt a pang of guilt thinking about Noah and Chloe, my innocent grandkids who weren't to blame for anything. But immediately after, I felt something stronger: resolve. I was not responsible for the consequences of their parents' decisions. If Mason and Brittany had built an unsustainable lifestyle based on my money, they would have to adjust to their reality. The kids weren't going to die from changing schools. They weren't going to suffer permanent trauma from attending a public school instead of a private one. What would cause them real damage would be growing up watching their father exploit their grandmother without consequences. That was the true toxic lesson that had to be broken. That night, Margaret called. "How are you?" she asked with that big sister tone that knows all your battles. "Holding on," I replied honestly. There are moments when I want to cave, call them, fix everything. But then I remember Mason's "like" on that message, and the rage returns. Margaret sighed. "Guilt is the manipulator's last resort, Ellie. They are going to make you feel guilty for everything: the school, the debts, the marital problems they are surely going to have when the money runs out. But remember, you didn't create this situation. They created it by treating you like garbage." She was right, as always. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are two different things. That night I slept poorly, with confused dreams where Robert appeared and asked me what I had done with our son. I woke up at 4 a.m, soaked in sweat, with my heart racing. I went to the kitchen, made chamomile tea, and sat by the window. The city slept under a starless sky. I thought about all the moments where I had chosen false peace over real dignity. Every time I swallowed a hurtful comment from Brittany. Every occasion I ignored Mason's coldness. Every celebration I wasn't invited to, but sent money for the gift anyway. I had been an accomplice to my own invisibility, and now I was paying the price for years of complacency. But I was also doing something I had never done before. I was choosing myself. For the first time in decades, my needs mattered more than others. And although it hurt, although it tore me apart inside, I knew it was the right path. Friday dawned gray, with low clouds threatening rain. I woke up with a message from James. "Mrs. Vance, we need to meet. My office has been contacted. They want to negotiate." Negotiate? The word provoked a bitter smile. Now they wanted to negotiate. After years of taking without asking, after excluding me as if I were trash, after that still burned in my memory like a branding iron, now they wanted to sit down and negotiate as if this were a business contract. I arrived at James's office at 11 in the morning. He greeted me with a serious expression and led me to the conference room. On the table was a new folder with documents I hadn't seen before. I received a call from a colleague, James explained as he sat opposite me. Apparently, your son hired legal representation. They want to propose an agreement. My stomach tightened. What kind of agreement? James opened the folder and began to read. They propose that you continue with the monthly transfers in exchange for inclusion in family events and regular access to the grandchildren. Basically, they want to formalize what already existed, but in writing. I stared at him, hoping it was a cruel joke. It wasn't. Let me see if I understand, I said with a dangerously calm voice. They humiliate me publicly, exclude me from Christmas, treat me like an ATM for years, and now they want me to pay for the privilege of seeing my own grandchildren. They want a contract where I buy their affection. James nodded slowly. Basically, yes. Although obviously, it is drafted in more elegant terms. They speak of maintaining family stability and the well-being of the minors. I felt something break inside me. It wasn't sadness. It was absolute, incandescent, purifying fury. You know what, James? Answer them this. I propose a counter-agreement. They vacate my condo in 30 days. They return my vehicle immediately. I forgive the accumulated debt of almost $2 million that they are never going to pay me, and we part ways as strangers, which is clearly what they prefer to be. James looked at me with something resembling respect. Are you sure? Once this response is sent, there is no going back. They are going to fight. Let them fight? I replied. I have all the documents. They only have audacity and a desperate need to maintain a lifestyle they could never afford alone. James typed while I spoke, capturing every word, transforming my fury into precise and irrefutable legal language. I left the office feeling strangely light. It was as if I had left a weight of decades behind in that conference room. I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I went into an elegant downtown cafe, ordered an expensive cappuccino and a piece of chocolate cake, and sat by the window to watch people pass by. I didn't check my phone. I didn't think about the consequences. I just existed in that moment, savoring the coffee, the chocolate, the freedom of not having to solve anyone else's problems but mine. It was 45 minutes of pure peace. Then, as if the universe couldn't let me rest, my phone started to vibrate. It was an unknown number. I answered out of curiosity. Eleanor Vance. It was a woman's voice I didn't recognize. This is Linda Moreno, Brittany's mother. I need to speak with you urgently. I was about to hang up, but something in her tone stopped me. She didn't sound manipulative. She sounded tired. What do you want, Linda? I asked coldly. There was a long sigh on the other end. I want to apologize for what is happening. Brittany told me her version, but I know my daughter. I know how she is. I know what she has been doing. That caught my attention completely. And what has she been doing exactly? Linda lowered her voice, as if she feared being overheard. Using my grandchildren as bargaining chips, isolating you while taking your money, convincing Mason that you are controlling when in reality, she is the one who controls everything. I leaned back in the cafe chair, processing this information. Why are you telling me this? Because I lived something similar with my mother-in-law 30 years ago, Linda replied. And I regret every day having kept her away from my husband. When she died, he never completely forgave me. I saw the light die in his eyes. I don't want my grandkids to grow up with that resentment. I don't want Brittany to destroy her marriage with greed. There was something genuine in her voice that made me lower my guard. Your daughter excluded me from Christmas, Linda. My own son liked that message. Do you understand what that means? It wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. It was cruel. I know, Linda said with a broken voice. And it is wrong. Terribly wrong. But I also know that Mason is weak. Brittany has him completely manipulated. She threatens to leave and take the kids every time he doesn't do what she wants. That information hit me. It didn't justify anything, but it explained Mason's complicity. He wasn't strong. He never had been. Since he was a boy, he had been sensitive. needing approval, fearful of conflict. Brittany had seen that and exploited it masterfully. "And what do you suggest I do?" I asked, although I already knew it wouldn't change my decision. "I am not asking you to return the money," Linda said quickly. "That would be absurd. You have every right to cut off the supply. What I am asking is that, when this explodes, and it is going to explode because Brittany doesn't know how to live without luxuries, don't completely close the door on Mason. He is weak, but he is your son. And deep down, I know he loves you. He is just lost." We hung up after a few more minutes of conversation. I stared at my now cold coffee, thinking about Linda's words. Part of me wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that my son still loved me, that he was just confused, manipulated, lost. But another part of me, the part that had grown in the last few weeks, knew that love without actions is just an empty word. Mason might love me in theory, but in practice, he had abandoned me. That night, Margaret came to my house with a bottle of wine and Italian takeout. "You need company," she said simply. We sat in my living room, with pasta plates on the coffee table, and I told her about Linda's call. Margaret listened in silence, chewing thoughtfully. "What do you feel?" she asked finally. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to believe there is hope. That when the dust settles, Mason is going to wake up and return to being the son I knew. But then I think about that, about years of accumulated contempt, and I realize that maybe the son I knew never really existed. Maybe he was always selfish, and I was too blinded by maternal love to see it." Margaret put her hand on mine. "Or maybe it is both things. Maybe he was a good son who became a bad man. People change, Ellie, and not always for the better." On Saturday, I received a notification that chilled my blood. It was an email from the bank. "Dear Mrs. Vance, we have received a loan application using the property located at as collateral." It was the condo. Mason and Brittany had tried to take out a loan using my condo as collateral. Of course, the application was rejected because they weren't the owners, but the mere fact that they had tried showed me the level of desperation they had reached. I called James immediately. "This is attempted fraud," he said with a tense voice. "We could press criminal charges if you want." "No," I replied after thinking about it. "Not yet. But I want it on the record. And I want the eviction notice accelerated." James was silent for a moment. "Understood. I will proceed with an expedited eviction. In 2 weeks, they will have to be out." 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, my son and his family would be homeless due to their own greed and stupidity. I should feel guilty. I should feel remorse. But all I felt was a cold and determined calm. They had chosen this path when they decided I was expendable. Now they would live the consequences of treating the wrong person like trash. Sunday dawned with an unsettling silence. No calls, no texts, no desperate voice notes. It was as if on the other side they had finally accepted defeat or were planning something. Knowing Brittany, probably the latter. I dressed in comfortable clothes and decided to do something I had postponed for months. Cleaning Robert's study. There was a room in my condo that I kept almost like a sanctuary. My husband's things were still there, intact. As if at any moment he was going to return and need his favorite armchair, his architecture books, his vinyl record collection. Mason had asked me several times to give him those things, especially the records that were worth money, but I always found excuses not to do it. Now I understood why. Subconsciously, I knew he would sell them, turn them into cash, make them disappear. I opened the study door, and the smell of wood and old books hit me with nostalgia. I sat in Robert's chair and cried. Not for Mason, not for Brittany. I cried for Robert, for the good man he had been, for the father who never saw what his son became, for the years stolen from us together. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the air. I tried to raise him right. I tried to give him values. But something went wrong, my love. Something went terribly wrong. I spent hours there, going through boxes, reading old letters Robert had written me when we were young. He had been romantic, detailed, present. He had loved me in a way I now realized I had never experienced since. After his death, I had poured myself completely into Mason, turning my son into my reason for existing. That had been my mistake. I had put my entire identity into being a mother, forgetting that I was also Eleanor, a complete woman with dreams and needs of her own. Monday morning, I received a call from a corporate number. It was the firm where Mason worked as an architect. Mrs. Vance? This is Richard Fuentes from Human Resources. We need to verify some information Mr. Mason Vance put on his payroll loan application. My stomach sank. What information? He listed your condo as a residence reference and proof of economic solvency. We need to confirm that you are his co-signer. I closed my eyes. Of course. After failing with the bank, now he was trying to use his job to get money. Mr. Fuentes, I need to be very clear. I am not a co-signer for Mason Vance for any loan. The condo he refers to is my exclusive property, and he does not have my authorization to use it as a guarantee for anything. There was an uncomfortable silence. I understand. Thank you for the clarification, ma'am. This significantly changes his application. After hanging up, I stared at the phone. Mason was desperate. So desperate he was lying, attempting fraud, using my name without permission. The son I had raised, the boy I had educated in honesty and values, had become this. A desperate man, capable of anything to maintain a facade of success that had never been real. Mid-morning, a message arrived. It was from an unknown number, but the content froze my blood. It was an audio file. I played it and heard Brittany's voice, but she wasn't speaking to me. It was a conversation someone had recorded secretly. Brittany was talking to someone, probably a friend, saying, "The stupid old hag finally realized we were using her, but it's too late. We have to hurry and squeeze everything we can out of her before she reacts. Mason is so useless he can't even confront his own mother. But it doesn't matter. When we have enough money saved, we are going to divorce anyway. And I keep everything." My blood turned to ice. I kept listening. Brittany continued. "The condo is in her name. What a pity. But we can still take out loans, sell things, squeeze everything possible. And if the old lady gets difficult, we use the kids. She would do anything to see those brats." The recording ended there. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the phone. A text message arrived after the audio. "It's Linda, Brittany's mother. I found this on my daughter's phone. I thought you should hear it. I am so sorry, Eleanor. My daughter is a monster, and I was blind for too long. Do what you have to do." I saved the audio immediately. It was evidence. Evidence of calculated manipulation, planned fraud, deliberate emotional abuse. I called James. His assistant put me through immediately. "I have something you need to hear," I said. I went straight to his office and played the audio for him. James listened to it twice, taking notes, his expression becoming more serious with every word. "This is legal gold," he said finally. "It demonstrates intent to defraud, manipulation, and financial abuse. With this, we can not only accelerate the eviction, but also file a civil suit for damages if you wish." "I don't want their money," I replied with a tired voice. "They have nothing I want. I just want them out of my life, and for this to end." James nodded. "Then we will use this as leverage. If they try to fight the eviction, this comes to light. It is in their interest to leave quietly and disappear." I liked his way of thinking. Strategic, cold, effective. That afternoon I did something I needed to do for a long time. I went to the cemetery where Robert was buried. I hadn't gone in months. I always found excuses. I was always too busy solving Mason's invented crises. I sat in front of the gray granite headstone with his name engraved. "Hi, my love," I whispered. "I'm sorry I haven't come sooner. I've been lost, but I think I am finally finding my way back to myself." I told him everything. I told him about the message, about the exclusion, about the years of financial abuse I had normalized. I told him about Brittany and her plans, about Mason and his cowardice, about my decision to cut everything off. "I know you would have liked me to be more patient," I said, wiping away tears. "I know you always saw the best in people, but this isn't disloyalty to our son. This is survival, and I hope, that you would understand." The wind moved the leaves of the nearby trees, and for a moment I felt peace, as if Robert had heard me and given me his blessing. I stayed there another hour, cleaning the headstone, arranging the flowers, telling him about my plans for the future. Plans that didn't include sacrificing myself, until I disappeared. Plans that included me as the protagonist of my own life. On Tuesday, the bomb dropped. Mason showed up at my job. He hadn't been to my office in years, but there he was, at the reception desk, demanding to see me. My assistant called me, nervous. "Mrs. Vance, there is a man here who claims to be your son. He is very upset. He wants me to call security." For a moment I considered saying yes, but something made me change my mind. "No, tell him to come up, but keep the phone ready just in case." Mason entered my office like a whirlwind. He had lost weight, had deep circles under his eyes, his hair disheveled. He looked defeated. "Mom, please." He started before I could say anything. "They are going to kick us out of the condo. The cards don't work. The bank rejected my loan. My job rejected my request. We don't have money for rent anywhere else. What do you want us to do? Live on the street?" I stared at him from my desk. This desperate man was my son, the baby I had carried, the boy I had protected, the young man I had pushed forward. But he was also the man who had betrayed me, who had allowed me to be humiliated, who had liked my exclusion. "Mason," I said with a calm but firm voice, "you are 35 years old. You are a licensed architect. You have a stable job. If you can't support your family with your salary, that is your problem, not mine." "But I've never had to do it," he exploded. "It has always been you, paying for everything, solving everything. How do you expect me to suddenly be able to sustain everything all by myself?" And there it was, the naked, raw truth. He had never learned to be self-sufficient because I had never forced him to be. I had incapacitated him with my generosity. I had created a dependent adult who collapsed at the first sign of real responsibility. "Exactly why this has to end," I replied. "Because you became a parasite, Mason, and I allowed it to happen by being your willing host. But this is over. You are going to have to learn to live with what you earn, like millions of people in this world." He let himself fall into the chair opposite my desk, head in his hands. "Brittany is going to leave me," he murmured. "She says, if I don't fix this, she takes the kids and leaves me." Mason's words floated in the air of my office like toxic smoke. Brittany was going to leave him. She was going to take the kids. And in some twisted way, he expected me to feel pity and open my wallet once more to save his marriage built on lies and my money. I leaned back in my leather chair and observed him, really observed him, as if seeing him for the first time in years. This hunched, defeated man sobbing in my office wasn't the victim. He was the accomplice. "Then let her go," I said finally. Mason lifted his head with red, swollen eyes. "What? Let her go, Mason. If Brittany only stays with you because there is money involved, then it isn't a marriage. It is a business transaction. And you deserve more than that, even if right now you don't see it." He shook his head violently. "You don't understand. I love her. I love my kids. I can't lose them." "You love her?" I asked, leaning forward. "Or do you love the idea of having a perfect family to post on social media? Because from where I am sitting, what I see is a man who sold his own mother to maintain a pretty lie." Mason stood up abruptly. "I never sold you. You are my mother. It's just, Brittany has her ways, and I have to keep the peace in my house by liking it when she excludes me from Christmas," I said in a dangerously low voice. "That is your way of keeping the peace. Sacrificing me so as not to inconvenience your wife." Mason stayed silent. He had no defense for that, because there was no possible defense. "I need you to understand something," I continued. "I love you. I am always going to love you because you are my son, but I no longer respect you. And without respect, love becomes something toxic that destroys us both." "Mom, please," he started, but I interrupted him by raising my hand. "You have 2 weeks to vacate the condo. The car must be returned this week. I am not going to change my mind. I am not going to cave. I am not going to rescue you this time, nor the next, nor ever again. It is time for you to grow up, Mason. It is time you learned that actions have consequences." He looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and desperation. "I can't believe you are capable of doing this," he said with a broken voice. "I can't believe you were capable of treating me the way you did," I replied. "But here we are. Now, please, leave my office. I have work to do." Mason stood there a few seconds longer, as if waiting for me to crumble, to yield, to return to being the infinitely generous and eternally exploitable mother. But when he saw it wasn't going to happen, he left, slamming the door so hard it made the pictures on the wall shake. My assistant ran in. "Are you okay, Mrs. Vance?" We heard the slam. "I am perfectly fine," I replied. And to my surprise, it was true. I felt perfectly fine, strong, whole. For the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty for setting boundaries. That night, when I got home, I found something unexpected in my mailbox. It was a handwritten letter, with childish, irregular handwriting. I opened it with shaking hands. "Dear Grandma Eleanor," it read. "I miss visiting you a lot. I miss your cookies and your hugs. Mom says you are mad at us. I don't know why. I love you very much. Your grandson, Noah." Underneath was a drawing of two figures holding hands, one big and one small, with a bright yellow sun above. I sat on the floor of my entryway and cried like I hadn't cried in weeks. I cried for Noah, for Chloe, for the relationship we were losing because of their parents' toxicity. I called Margaret immediately. "I can't do this," I told her between sobs. "I can't stay away from my grandkids. They are innocent. They aren't to blame." Margaret listened to my crying for a few minutes before speaking. "Ellie, listen to me. Those kids are going to be okay. You are going to find a way to maintain contact with them when they get older. But right now, if you cave, you are teaching Noah and Chloe that it is okay to exploit people who love you. Is that what you want them to learn?" She was right. I knew it. But intellectual knowledge didn't soothe the pain of Noah's letter burning in my hands. "Brittany used that child to write this," Margaret said with a hard voice. "A 5-year-old boy doesn't write spontaneous letters. She made him write this because she knew it was the only weapon that could still work. It is pure manipulation." I knew it then. Of course, it was manipulation. The handwriting was Noah's, but the words smelled of Brittany. On Wednesday, I received a message from James. "I need to see you urgently. Things have happened." I arrived at his office with my heart racing. James greeted me with a grave expression and showed me some documents. "Brittany filed a lawsuit against you. She accuses you of emotional abuse against the minors by cutting off their financial supply. She argues that you have been the primary provider for years, and that withdrawing that support suddenly constitutes child abandonment." I was breathless. "Can she do that?" James smiled coldly. "She can try. She won't win. The children have 2 employed parents, professionals, capable. You are the grandmother. You have no legal obligation to support them. But this tells us that Brittany is willing to drag your name through the mud publicly. We have to counterattack." He pulled out a thick folder. "I have prepared a countersuit for attempted fraud, financial abuse, and defamation. I also have the audio that Linda gave us. If she wants war, we are going to give her war." I thought about Noah and Chloe. I thought about how this would affect them. But then I thought about me, about my dignity, about my right to live without being blackmailed and abused. "Proceed," I said. James nodded and began explaining the legal strategy. We would present evidence of all transfers over 7 years. They would show that Mason and Brittany had lived far beyond their means thanks to my generosity. The audio of Brittany would be the centerpiece, demonstrating intent to fraud and calculated manipulation. "Also," James added, "I am going to request a temporary restraining order, so they cannot approach your work or harass you. The constant messages and Mason's visit to your office constitute harassment." Everything was becoming so legal, so cold, so definitive. This was my family, my son, my grandkids. And we were ending up in court like enemies. How had we come to this? That night I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed until 4 in the morning, when I finally gave up and got up. I made tea and sat in the darkness of my living room. My phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. I opened it, and my blood froze. It was a photo of Noah and Chloe, asleep in what seemed to be the back seat of a car. The message said, "Is this what you want? For your grandkids to live in a car because their grandmother is selfish?" My hands shook with rage. Brittany was using those children as weapons. She was putting them in situations designed to manipulate me emotionally. I took a screenshot and sent it to James with a note. More evidence of manipulation. She is using the kids deliberately, James replied in minutes. Despite the hour, this is gold. It demonstrates extreme emotional manipulation. We are burying her with her own stupidity. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt destroyed. This war was bringing out the worst in everyone. Brittany showing her true, monstrous nature, Mason revealing his cowardice, and me, discovering I had steel in my spine I never knew I had. On Friday morning, I received a call from the kids' school again. Mrs. Vance, we regret to inform you that Noah and Chloe have not attended classes this week. The parents are not answering our calls. Since you were listed as an emergency contact, we wanted to verify if you know anything. My heart began to beat uncontrollably. They haven't gone all week? No, ma'am. And we have the pending payment. Normally we wouldn't worry so much, but given that they are small children, I hung up and called Mason immediately. He didn't answer. I called Brittany. Neither did she. I called James back. The kids haven't been to school in a week. They aren't answering calls. I need to know where they are. James acted with impressive speed. In 2 hours, he had a private investigator tracking the last known locations of Mason and Brittany. By 3 in the afternoon, he had answers. We found them, James said over the phone. They are in a motel on the outskirts of the city. Apparently, they have been there since Tuesday, when you spoke with Mason in your office. My blood boiled. A motel. They had taken my grandkids out of school and kept them in a cheap hotel to create a narrative of victimization. I'm going there, I said, grabbing my keys. No, replied James firmly. Do not go alone. They could accuse you of anything. I am going to send the investigator with a child welfare officer. If the children are in inadequate conditions, there is a legal basis to intervene. I hated waiting, but I knew he was right. I couldn't give them more ammunition. 2 agonizing hours passed. Finally, James called. The kids are physically okay. Scared, confused, but okay. The officer spoke with Brittany. She argues they are there temporarily because you left them homeless. They still have 2 weeks in the condo, I said through clenched teeth. I know, the officer reminded her. He also informed her that taking the kids out of school without justification can be considered educational neglect. Brittany changed her story. Now she says they are sick, but she has no medical notes. She is digging her own grave. I felt relief mixed with fury. Can I see them? I don't recommend direct contact yet, but I can request supervised visits if you want. As a grandmother, you have rights. That night, while I was processing everything, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and almost fell over from shock. It was Linda, Brittany's mother, accompanied by a man I assumed was her husband. I opened the door with caution. Linda looked tired, defeated. Eleanor, please, I need to talk to you. This is Frank, my husband. I let them in, although every fiber of my being screamed not to trust. We sat in the living room. Linda breathed deeply before speaking. It was me who reported Brittany to Child Protective Services. I froze. What? Frank took his wife's hand. Our daughter has become someone we don't recognize, he said with a grave voice. When we found out she had taken the kids out of school to live in a dirty hotel just to manipulate you, that was enough. Those kids are our grandkids too. We aren't going to allow her to use them as pawns. Linda pulled an envelope from her purse. This is a sworn affidavit from me and Frank. We documented years of manipulative behavior by Brittany, how she has lied, manipulated, and used people, how she has asked us for loan money with false stories, how she has told Mason she will leave him and take the kids every time he doesn't do exactly what she wants. We want this to stop, and if that means testifying against our own daughter in court, we will do it. I stared at the envelope, unable to fully process what was happening. Brittany's parents were on the side of the truth, even if it meant exposing their daughter. Why? I asked with a hoarse voice. Frank replied. Because allowing her to abuse you would make us accomplices. Because those kids deserve to grow up in an environment where people treat each other with respect. And because, frankly, Mrs. Vance, you have been more generous to our family than we could ever be. You didn't deserve this. Linda wiped her tears. Brittany learned these behaviors partly from me. When I was young, I also manipulated. I used people's emotions to get what I wanted. My first marriage was destroyed by that. When I met Frank, he made me see how toxic I was. I changed, but the damage to Brittany was already done. She saw those patterns in her childhood and perfected them. It is my fault, in many ways, and I need to do the right thing now. I poured them coffee, and we talked for hours. They told me stories that chilled my blood. Brittany had scammed her elderly aunt, inventing a medical emergency and keeping $15,000 she never returned. She had manipulated a previous boyfriend into buying a car in her name, then left him and kept the vehicle. She had convinced friends to lend her money she never paid back. Mason hadn't been her first victim. He was just the most successful one because I was behind him with an open wallet. Does Mason know all this? I asked. Linda shook her head. Brittany is brilliant at keeping her life compartmentalized. Mason only knows the version of her that she wants to show him. The perfect wife, the devoted mother, the woman who only wants the best for her family, Frank added. And when he starts to see cracks in the facade, she uses sex, tears, or the threat of taking the kids. She keeps him controlled with fear and guilt. I went to sleep that night with my head spinning. The next day was Saturday and, according to James, it would be the day of the final confrontation. He had organized an informal meeting in a public restaurant. Present would be me, Mason, Brittany, Linda, Frank, and James as legal mediator. The goal was to try to reach an agreement without going to court, but we all knew it would probably end in an explosion. I arrived at the restaurant at 2 p.m. It was an elegant place, but not ostentatious, with tables spaced for privacy. James was already there, with his briefcase and his shark expression. Linda and Frank arrived minutes later. We waited. At 2:15, Mason and Brittany entered. Mason looked worse than the last time I saw him. Brittany, however, came impeccably groomed, in a cream-colored dress and perfect makeup. Always the presentation. We sat at a large table, with James at the head as referee. The tension was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Brittany was the first to speak, with a soft, controlled voice. Eleanor, I appreciate you agreeing to this meeting. I think there have been terrible misunderstandings and that, as a family, we can resolve this civilly. Her tone was perfect, conciliatory, reasonable. Anyone who didn't know her would think she was the voice of reason. But I knew her now. I had seen behind the mask. Brittany, I said with a calm voice, save the theater. Everyone here knows exactly who you are. She blinked, her mask wavering slightly. I don't know what you are referring to, James intervened, pulling documents from his briefcase. Mrs. Brittany Vance, we have extensive evidence of manipulation, attempted fraud, and financial abuse, including a recording where you discuss plans to squeeze Mrs. Vance and then divorce your husband. The color drained from Brittany's face. She looked at Linda with accusing eyes. You. Linda held her gaze without wavering. Me. Because what you are doing is wrong, Brittany, and I am not going to be an accomplice to it. Mason looked confused. What recording are they talking about? James pulled out his phone and played the audio. Brittany's voice filled the space between us. The stupid old hag finally realized. Squeeze everything we can. When we have enough money saved, we are going to divorce anyway. I watched Mason's face go through all the stages of shock. Disbelief, recognition, horror, betrayal. He looked at Brittany as if seeing her for the first time. You were going to leave me? He asked with a broken voice. Brittany tried to take his hand. Baby. That was taken out of context. I was angry that day. I was just venting to a friend. I didn't mean it. But her voice had lost its assurance. She sounded desperate. And the part about squeezing my mother? Mason asked, withdrawing his hand. Was that also taken out of context? Brittany looked around for support, but found none. Even her parents looked at her with disappointment. Mason, your mother was controlling us with her money. Everything came with strings attached. I had to liberate us from that dependency. It was incredible. Even trapped, even exposed, she still tried to manipulate the narrative. James put more documents on the table. Here are all the records of Mrs. Vance's transfers over 7 years, $1,800,000. There was never a single condition. She never asked for anything in return, just love and basic respect, and you gave her humiliation and exclusion. Brittany stood up abruptly. I am not going to stay here and be judged by people who don't understand how hard it is to raise kids in this economy. Sit down, Brittany, Frank said with a voice that allowed no argument. She looked at him surprised. Her father had never spoken to her like that. Slowly, she sat down. James continued. Here is my proposal. You vacate the condo in 1 week. You return the vehicle today. Mrs. Vance will not press charges for attempted fraud. In exchange, you sign an agreement where you renounce any future claim on Mrs. Vance's estate. Additionally, a supervised visitation schedule is established so she can see her grandchildren once a month. Mason looked at the table, defeated. Brittany clenched her jaw with fury. And if we refuse? She asked with venom in her voice. James smiled coldly. Then we see you in court, where all this evidence becomes public, where your reputation gets destroyed, where potentially Child Protective Services gets involved deeper, and where, I guarantee you, you are going to lose everything anyway, just with added public humiliation. The silence that followed James's words was deafening. Brittany looked at the documents on the table as if they were venomous snakes. Mason had his head in his hands, breathing heavily. Linda was crying silently, while Frank squeezed her shoulder. And I, sitting there with my back straight and hands calm on my lap, felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. I need to talk to Brittany in private, Mason said finally with a hoarse voice. James shook his head. Everything discussed must be here, with witnesses, no more private manipulations. Mason looked up, eyes bloodshot. I am not going to manipulate anything. I just need to speak with my wife. I looked at James, who sighed and nodded. 5 minutes. At that table over there, in plain sight, Mason and Brittany got up and went to a nearby table. We watched them, but couldn't hear. I saw how Mason spoke with sharp gestures, how Brittany tried to touch him, and he pulled away. I saw the exact moment she realized she had lost. Her face went from pleading to fury in seconds. She said something that made Mason recoil as if she had slapped him. Then she got up and walked directly toward our table. Fine, she said with a tense voice. I will sign your damn agreement. But I want everyone here to know that you are destroying a family. Those kids are going to grow up wondering why their rich grandmother abandoned them. They are going to know we had to move to a horrible place because their grandmother decided to be cruel and vindictive. She looked directly at me, with pure hatred in her eyes. I hope it's worth it, Eleanor. I hope your wounded pride is worth the price of not watching your grandkids grow up. I stood up slowly, holding her gaze. Brittany, my grandkids are going to grow up knowing the truth. They are going to know their grandmother loved them so much she refused to allow their parents to raise them in an environment of lies and manipulation. They are going to know their grandmother had the courage to set boundaries when it hurt. And someday, when they are adults and understand how the world works, they are going to look for me. And I am going to be there, waiting for them with open arms. Brittany let out a bitter laugh. What a nice speech. Very inspiring. But the reality is, you are a bitter old woman who couldn't stand not being the center of attention. All this because we didn't invite you to a Christmas dinner. A single dinner. And for that, you destroyed everything. Her voice had raised in volume. Some people at other tables were starting to look. No, I said with a firm but calm voice. This is because for years you treated me like a walking bank. Because you used me, humiliated me, and made me feel my only value was financial. The Christmas dinner was just the straw that broke the camel's back. It was the moment I finally saw with clarity what you really thought of me. James intervened before Brittany could respond. Enough drama. Sign. Or we see you in court. Mason had returned to the table. He looked defeated, like a man who had just lost everything he believed in. We will sign, he said with a dull voice. Brittany looked at him with fury but said nothing. James took out the documents and placed them in front of them. 3 copies of the agreement. The terms were clear. Immediate eviction, return of the vehicle, waiver of any future claims, and monthly supervised visits with the kids. Brittany signed first, with violent strokes that almost tore the paper. Mason signed next, with a shaking hand. Then it was my turn. I put my name on those documents and felt as if I were signing the death certificate of a relationship that had died a long time ago. James collected the copies and put them in his briefcase. You have until next Friday to vacate. Keys must be delivered to my office. The vehicle must be in Mrs. Vance's building parking lot tonight at the latest. Brittany stood up without saying a word and walked out of the restaurant. Mason stayed a moment longer, looking at me with eyes full of something that could have been regret or resentment. I wasn't sure. Mom, he said finally, I'm sorry. For everything. Those were the only sincere words I had heard from him in months. I didn't answer. I just nodded. He left following Brittany, walking like a man towards his execution. Linda approached me after they left. Thank you for not destroying them completely. I know you could have. I hugged her. This woman who had the courage to betray her own daughter to do the right thing. Your grandkids need good grandparents in their lives. Stay close to them. They are going to need all the stability possible in the coming months. Linda nodded, crying on my shoulder. Frank shook my hand firmly before leaving with his wife. Margaret, who had been silent throughout the entire encounter, finally spoke. How do you feel? I thought about the question. How did I feel? Free, I replied finally. I feel free, Margie. For the first time in 15 years, I feel like I can breathe without the weight of other people's expectations and demands crushing my chest. She smiled with tears in her eyes. I am so proud of you, sis. The following days passed in a blur of activity. The car was returned that same night, parked in front of my building with the keys left with the concierge. On Friday, as agreed, Mason and Brittany delivered the condo keys to James's office. There were no dramatic goodbyes, no last pleas, just silence and signed papers. I went to the condo after they left to assess the damage. I expected to find destruction, revenge materialized in scratched walls or broken appliances. But no, they had left everything clean, orderly, empty. It was as if they had never been there. I walked through the empty rooms, my steps echoing in the furniture-free space. This had been their home for years. Now it was just an empty shell full of memories that hurt too much to keep. I hired a deep cleaning company and then a real estate agency. I want to sell it, I told the agent. I don't want to remodel or update it. Sell it as is. He assessed the space with a professional eye. It is an excellent location and square footage. We can get a good price even without upgrades. I signed the listing papers that same day. I needed to close that chapter completely. With the money I knew would come from the sale, I made decisions that were mine alone. I signed up for painting classes, something I had wanted to do for 30 years but never had time for. I booked a trip to Italy for the spring. A trip Robert and I had planned to take before he died and that I had postponed indefinitely. I donated $50,000 to a shelter for women, victims of abuse, because now I understood that abuse came in many forms. 1 month after the confrontation at the restaurant, I had my first supervised visit with Noah and Chloe. We met at a public park, with a social worker present. The kids ran toward me with hugs that made me cry. "Grandma, I missed you so much," said Noah. Chloe, too small to really understand what had happened, just wanted to show me she had learned to jump rope. We spent 2 hours together. I bought them ice cream. We played on the swings. I read them stories on a bench under a tree. I didn't speak ill of their parents. I didn't try to explain things they couldn't understand. I was just their grandmother, present and loving in that moment. When it was time to leave, Noah hugged me tight and whispered, "Mom says you don't have money anymore, and that's why we can't live in the pretty house. But I don't care about money. I just want you to come visit us." Those words broke me and healed me at the same time. Brittany was telling them her distorted version of the story, but the kids, with their innocence and clarity, saw the simple truth. Love isn't bought. Presence is what matters. I hugged them both and promised, "I am going to see you every month, my loves. That is guaranteed. And when you are older, you will understand everything. For now, just know your grandmother loves you more than anything in the world." That night, back in my home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my balcony. The city stretched out before me, millions of lights twinkling like terrestrial stars. I thought about everything I had lost: the illusion of a united family, the daily closeness with my grandkids, the relationship with my son that would probably never be the same. But I also thought about everything I had gained: my dignity, my autonomy, my peace of mind, my self-respect. Margaret was right that night, weeks ago, when she asked, when was the last time I did something just because I wanted to? The answer then had been never. But now, sitting on my balcony with my wine and my newly discovered freedom, the answer was different. Now, I was doing things for myself now. And for the first time in decades, it felt good. It felt right. It felt like really living instead of just existing for others. And if someone asked me if it was worth it, if all the pain and loss were worth the price of my freedom, the answer would be a resounding yes, because I discovered something every woman should know. You aren't selfish for putting yourself first. You aren't cruel for setting boundaries. You aren't a bad mother for stopping your sacrifice at the altar of a toxic family. You are human, and you deserve respect, love, and dignity just as much as anyone else in this world.